During a vacation flight to Hawaii, both the pilot and co-pilot suddenly faint, leaving the passengers in shock and panic. Their only hope? A 12-year-old boy named Jake. What he does next leaves everyone stunned. Jake had always felt most alive in front of his computer, immersed in the world of flight simulators. The detailed control panel, the feel of commanding an airplane, made him forget that he was just a boy in a small American town. To him, it wasn't just a game. It was a gateway to the sky, a glimpse into his future. Despite Jake's passion, his parents, Tom and Sarah, saw things differently. Tom, a practical man, viewed the games as a dangerous distraction. "Jake, you're spending too much time on that computer. This isn't real life. Go outside, play with your friends, do something productive," Tom would say, his voice filled with frustration. Sarah, more understanding, noticed the happiness in Jake's eyes. She understood that the games represented something deeper, but she was also worried. "Tom, he's just a child. Let him dream a little." But, "Jake, maybe try to balance things out. Go outside more, make new friends," she suggested, trying to find a compromise. Jake, however, found a sense of freedom in the flight simulator that he didn't experience in real life. In the virtual world, he was the commander, responsible for every decision and maneuver. He studied manuals on aerodynamics, emergency procedures, and navigation, dreaming of one day becoming a real pilot. But his parents didn't take this dream seriously. To them, it was just a phase that would pass. Over time, Jake's relationship with the simulator created a barrier between him and his parents. Tom became increasingly impatient, and even Sarah's understanding couldn't hide her growing concern. "Jake, you can't spend all day playing. This isn't healthy," she said gently though firmly. "But Mom, I'm learning. This is important to me," Jake would respond, a mix of frustration and a yearning to be understood. Deep down, Jake knew it wasn't just a game. It was a calling, a passion he wanted to pursue. But for now, his dream seemed distant, buried under the weight of his parents' expectations. One Saturday morning, after spending the night on a complex flight simulation, Jake descended the stairs with a slight smile, still replaying the mission in his mind. However, that smile quickly faded when he saw Tom sitting at the kitchen table with a stern expression. "You spent the whole night on that computer again, didn't you?" Tom began, his voice sharp. "This is unacceptable. I told you these games aren't real life. You need to focus on what matters, your studies, your health." Jake tried to defend himself, but he knew it was pointless. Tom wasn't going to listen. His dream of becoming a pilot felt more distant than ever, overshadowed by his father's disapproval. Sarah, trying to ease the tension, offered a compromise. "Tom, maybe we can set some limits? Let him play, but only on weekends and as long as it doesn't interfere with his studies." Tom, clearly frustrated, reluctantly agreed. "Fine, but no games during the week." Jake nodded, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. Though it wasn't what he wanted, it was better than nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had broken between him and his parents. Summer arrived, and with it, the Johnson family decided to take a much-needed vacation to Hawaii. The trip was meant to ease the tension at home, but Jake's desire to fly, his passion for the sky, was never far from his thoughts. At the airport, as they waited to board, Jake couldn't contain his curiosity. He watched every movement of the crew, fascinated by the operations, especially those of the pilots. As they passed by the cockpit, one of the pilots noticed Jake's wide-eyed wonder and smiled. "Would you like to be a pilot one day?" the pilot asked. Jake nodded eagerly. "Then study hard and never give up on your dreams," the pilot said with a friendly smile before returning to his duties. The pilot's words resonated deeply with Jake. He knew, without a doubt, that flying was what he wanted to do. As the plane took off, Jake's heart raced with excitement, watching the horizon expand before him. The sky was where he belonged. The flight seemed calm, and the passengers were relaxed. Jake sat beside his parents, still lost in thoughts about the cockpit. Then, an unusual commotion among the flight attendants caught his attention. One of them made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, We are facing a medical emergency in the cockpit. Please remain seated and follow the crew's instructions." Whispers spread throughout the cabin, and Jake's heart pounded as he overheard one of the attendants mention that both the pilot and co-pilot had fainted. Panic started to ripple through the passengers. Without a pilot, the plane was in serious trouble. Jake knew enough about aviation to realize the gravity of the situation. The plane began to experience turbulence, and he noticed they were losing altitude. For the first time, he saw genuine fear in his father's eyes. His mother clutched his hand, trying to stay calm. "Everything will be okay," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Suddenly, an idea flashed in Jake's mind. He had spent countless hours dealing with emergency situations in flight simulators. He knew it wasn't the same as flying a real plane, but maybe, just maybe, he could help. Gathering his courage, Jake approached one of the attendants. "I know this sounds crazy, but I've spent a lot of time on flight simulators. I might be able to help." The attendant looked at Jake, unsure of what to say. But in a moment of desperation, she decided to take him seriously. She went to the cockpit and returned moments later, asking Jake to follow her. Inside the cockpit, the situation was dire. The plane was being controlled by autopilot, but it wouldn't last forever. Jake felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders as he took a seat at the controls. The voice of the air traffic controller came through the headset. "Flight 5678, this is Honolulu Control Tower. We'll guide you to a safe landing. Stay calm and follow our instructions." Jake, trying to stay composed, responded, "Roger, Control Tower. I'm ready." He focused on the instruments, his hands shaking but determined. He had trained for this, sort of. Every instruction from the control tower was critical. As Jake followed the instructions to adjust the altitude and stabilize the plane, he felt his confidence grow. In the cabin, the passengers sat in tense silence. Tom and Sarah were in shock, unable to believe that their son was in the cockpit. But they had no choice but to trust that Jake would do his best. As the plane approached Honolulu, Jake's heart raced. He aligned the plane with the runway, adjusted the speed, and prepared for landing. His hands were sweating, but he kept his focus, repeating to himself that he could do this. The runway came into view. Jake activated the landing gear and made the final adjustments. The plane descended, and with a slight jolt, it touched down safely. Cheers and applause erupted from the passengers. Jake, exhausted but relieved, leaned back in his seat. He had done it. He had landed the plane. As the emergency crews approached and passengers began to disembark, Jake finally realized the magnitude of what he had accomplished. He wasn't just a kid playing flight simulators anymore. He was a hero. And in that moment, Jake knew his dream of flying was more real than ever.